I overheard my son whispering to his wife, "She's senile anyway. No one will believe her." They thought I'd forget everything, but the next morning I walked into my lawyer's office. When my son got the court summons, he turned pale and stammered, "Mom, what did you do?" Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The words stopped me in the hallway. One moment I was carrying the linen napkins to the dining room. The next I was a statue, pressed against the cool wall by the kitchen archway. The clink of a wine glass against the marble countertop was a sharp punctuation to my son's sentence. "It's the only way, Chloe. The equity in this house alone is substantial. With her pension and the investments Dad left, we're talking about restructuring our entire financial picture." My daughter-in-law's voice was a low, considering hum. "And you're sure the doctor will agree for the petition?" Marcus let out a short breath. I knew that sound. It was the sound he made when he thought someone was being deliberately slow. "We have the notes from her last checkup. The occasional forgetfulness. We frame it as concern. Progressive decline. We say we want her in a facility where she can be monitored. She loves this house." Chloe's tone held no sympathy, only a logistical note. "She won't know what's happening. That's the point." His voice dropped, but the distance was perfect, the hallway acting as a conduit. The words arrived in my ear with crystalline clarity. "She's senile anyway. No one will believe her over us." There was a pause. Then Chloe's soft, agreeing chuckle. It was a dry, soundless thing, but I felt it in my bones. I did not gasp. I did not clutch my chest. My breath simply suspended itself. The stack of napkins in my hands, starched and ironed by my own hands that very afternoon, did not tremble. I looked down at them, at the precise, tight folds. I had done everything correctly. The meal was simmering. The table was set. My son and his wife were in my kitchen, drinking my wine and plotting the theft of my mind and my life. I took a step backward, silent on the runner. Then another. I turned and walked to my bedroom, closing the door with a soft, definitive click. I placed the napkins on my dresser, aligning the edges with the wood grain. I sat on the edge of my bed. The room was quiet. The betrayal was not a hot knife. It was an ice-cold infusion, spreading through my veins, slowing everything. I examined the feeling. Heartbreak was there, a familiar, dull ache. But it was immediately encased in something harder, something clear and sharp. Fury. Not a raging fire, but a block of glacial ice. It provided clarity. I thought of the doctor's appointment, a routine visit. Marcus had insisted on accompanying me. I had fumbled for the name of my medication for a moment, tired from the wait. The doctor had smiled, said it was normal. Marcus had taken notes on his phone. I had thought it was concern. I stood and walked to the mirror. Eleanor Jefferson looked back at me. 68 years old, dark brown skin, a face lined with experience, not confusion. Silver gray hair that I wore in neat, natural twists. My eyes, which had overseen countless classrooms and soothed many a troubled student, were now my own assessors. I looked for signs of the woman they described. I saw only a woman who had been foolishly trusting. Dinner was a performance. I let my hand hover over the salt shaker as if I'd forgotten its purpose. Now, where did I put my reading glasses? I mused aloud, patting my dress pocket where they obviously rested. "They're on your head, Mom," Marcus said, his voice a blend of warmth and a new, watchful condescension. "Oh, goodness." I laughed lightly, removing them. Silly me. I watched them. Chloe's glances at Marcus were quick, telegraphic. His responses were small nods, a tight smile. They were buoyant, thinking their plan was already succeeding. They discussed a potential retirement community they'd heard about, framing it as a resort. I chewed my roast chicken and nodded at the appropriate times. "It sounds lovely," I said, "but this old house is my home. I'd miss my garden." "You wouldn't have to lift a finger, Nora," Chloe said, her smile wide and empty. Think of the relief. Yes, I said softly. Relief. After they left with effusive kisses and promises to call tomorrow, I washed the dishes. The warm, soapy water flowed over my hands. I replayed the whisper. She's senile anyway. Each time, the ice within me solidified. I did not go to bed. I sat in the living room in the dark in my late husband Martin's favorite armchair. The streetlight cast long shadows. I considered my options. I could confront them. It would be emotional, messy. They would deny, gaslight, and accelerate their plans. I could do nothing and let them slowly, legally dismantle my autonomy. I could capitulate and enter whatever facility they chose, a prisoner labeled incompetent. Or I could fight. The law. It was a system of rules, of evidence. It cared not for a son's whisper or a daughter-in-law's greed. It cared for facts, for documentation, for sound mind. They believed I was slipping. I would use that belief against them. Their confidence was their vulnerability. I thought of Arthur Higgins, my lawyer for 40 years. He had handled Martin's will, the estate. He was a man of precision and principle, nearing 80, but with a mind like a steel trap. He respected me. More importantly, he did not suffer fools. A plan, cold and logical, began to form in the quiet dark. It was not a plan of shouting or accusation. It was a plan of paperwork, of preemptive strikes, of establishing immutable facts. They thought me a confused old woman. I would be the most clear-minded person in the room. When the first hint of dawn lightened the sky, I stood. My body was stiff, but my resolve was flexible and strong. I felt a strange, calm energy. The heartbreak was packed away, a relic to be examined later. The ice core fury was now my fuel. I went to my desk, a sturdy oak piece. I opened a drawer and took out a fresh yellow legal pad and a black pen. At the top, I wrote the date. Then, in my clear, principal's handwriting, I began to make notes. I listed my assets, the house, the pension accounts, the investments. I wrote down the names of my doctor, my bank, my financial advisor. I noted the exact time and context of the conversation I had overheard. This was not a journal of sorrow. It was a dossier. The first step in building my defense was to document my own competence. I wrote for an hour, the details precise, the chronology exact. My memory, it seemed, was perfectly intact when it mattered. As the sun fully rose, I put down the pen. I looked at the filled pages. This was my evidence. This was my first act of rebellion. They had declared me senile. I would prove them wrong in the most definitive arena possible. I would use their own words as the foundation for my liberation. The last straw had not broken me. It had simply shown me how sharp its edges could be, and I was now ready to grasp it. The morning light felt different. It was not gentle. It was illuminating, clinical. It showed the dust on the mantelpiece I had missed, the exact placement of every object in my bedroom. I had not slept, but I was not tired. The cold clarity from the night before had settled into a steady, operational calm. I went to my closet. My usual attire was comfortable: slacks, soft sweaters, practical shoes. Today required something else. I pushed the hangers aside until I found it. A dress of navy blue crepe, simple in cut, impeccable in tailoring. I had bought it for Martin's retirement dinner. I had not worn it since his funeral. It was armor. I showered and dressed with deliberate care. I smoothed the fabric over my hips. I fastened my pearls, the single strand Martin had given me on our 30th anniversary. The cool spheres against my neck were a tangible reminder of a bond that was real, in contrast to the betrayal now taking shape. I applied a minimal amount of lipstick, brushed my silver twists into perfect order, and regarded myself in the mirror. I did not see a victim. I saw a principal about to enter a meeting where the stakes were the highest of her life. My hand did not shake as I dialed Arthur Higgins's number from memory. I knew his direct line. The phone rang twice. Higgins and Associates. It was a young voice, likely a paralegal. "This is Eleanor Jefferson. I need to speak with Arthur. It is urgent." There was a brief pause. "Mr. Higgins is with a client. May I take a message?" "Tell him it's Nora Jefferson. Tell him it concerns a matter of guardianship and asset protection. He will see me." My voice was level, leaving no room for debate. I used the terms I had researched in the early hours. "One moment, please." I waited, listening to the muffled hold music. I looked out the window at my garden. The roses needed deadheading. The voice returned, respectful now. "Mrs. Jefferson, Mr. Higgins can see you at 11:30. He's cleared his lunch hour." "I will be there." I hung up. It was 8:15. Marcus would be at his office by 9. Chloe might call, performing her morning check-in. I could not be here for that. I wrote a note on the kitchen counter in my slightly enlarged script that I had used lately to pretend my eyesight was worse than it was. "Gone for a walk into the market. Back later. Don't worry." The exclamation point felt like a subtle jab. Let them think I was puttering about, harmless. I collected my purse, my dossier notepad, and my keys. I did not look back at the house. I got into my car, a sensible sedan I kept meticulously clean. The engine turned over smoothly. The drive into the city was a meditation. I followed the familiar route, but my mind was not on the road. It was rehearsing. I would need to be factual, not emotional. Concise, not rambling. I would present the situation as a legal problem to be solved, not a family tragedy to be mourned. Arthur would respond to that. His office was in an older brick building downtown, one that spoke of established practice rather than flashy wealth. I parked in the adjacent lot. I took a deep breath, checking my reflection in the visor mirror, composed, resolved. The elevator opened onto a quiet corridor. The door to his office was polished oak. I entered. The reception area was warm, with dark wood panels and shelves of leather-bound books. It smelled of lemon polish and paper. Arthur's secretary, Margaret, had been with him for decades. She looked up, her eyes widening slightly behind her glasses. She was used to seeing me arrive with Martin or for annual estate reviews. My formal dress and bearing today signaled something else. "Nora," she said, standing. "He's expecting you. Go right in." I thanked her and opened the heavy door to his inner office. Arthur Higgins rose from behind a massive desk piled with orderly stacks of files. He was a tall man, thin, with a full head of white hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. He was in his shirt sleeves, his tie slightly loosened. "Nora," he said, coming around the desk. He took both my hands in his. His grip was firm, dry. "Sit down. Margaret said it was urgent. Guardianship?" He guided me to a chair facing his desk and resumed his own seat, his gaze fixed on me, all business. I sat straight, my purse on my lap, my hands folded over it. "Yes, Arthur. A petition for guardianship, or conservatorship. I believe my son Marcus and his wife Chloe are preparing one. They intend to have me declared incompetent. Their goal is to control my assets, sell my house, and place me in a facility." Arthur did not flinch. He steepled his fingers under his chin. "I see. And what is the basis for this belief?" "I overheard them discussing it last night in my kitchen. They referenced my last doctor's visit where Marcus took notes on a moment of forgetfulness. They plan to frame it as progressive decline." I opened my purse and took out my legal pad. I read the quote verbatim, my voice devoid of inflection. My son said, "She's senile anyway. No one will believe her over us." His wife laughed in agreement. Arthur's mouth tightened into a thin line. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He had known Marcus since he was a boy. He had helped Martin structure our estate to provide for him. This betrayal in Arthur's domain of law and legacy was a profound insult. "Do you have any tangible evidence of their preparations? Emails? Inquiries to facilities?" "Not yet, but they will. They are confident. They believe their own narrative." I paused. I have been pretending to be more forgetful than I am. To test them. They are convinced. Arthur leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He looked out the window for a long moment, then back at me. You are, of course, under no obligation to wait for them to file. In fact, waiting would be a strategic error. It allows them to control the narrative and the timing. I agree. We file first, he said, the decision made. A petition in your name for a declaratory judgment confirming your testamentary and contractual capacity. We petition the court to affirm that you are fully competent to manage your person and your estate. We make it a matter of public record before they can file a thing. It is a preemptive strike. The terminology was correct. It was what I had hoped for. What does that require? A comprehensive evaluation by a geriatric psychiatrist of our choosing. A full financial audit to establish you are managing your affairs soundly. We document everything. We show the court a capable, decisive individual, while simultaneously hinting at the predatory intentions lying in wait. A cold, professional smile touched his lips. We subpoena their financial records. We look for evidence of debt, of inquiries into your assets, of conversations with realtors or care facilities. We turn their plan into evidence of their motive. I felt the first real surge of something other than ice. It was momentum. How long? We can have the initial petition drafted by end of day. I'll call Dr. Evans. He's the best, and he doesn't suffer fools. Once we file, they will be served with notice. It will shock them. He looked at me intently. Nora, this will escalate things. There will be no going back to polite pretenses. Are you prepared for that? I met his gaze. The pretenses ended last night, Arthur. They declared war on my autonomy. I am simply choosing the battlefield and the weapons. I placed my legal pad on his desk. This is my contemporaneous record of the event and my current assets. I started it immediately after overhearing them. He picked up the pad, scanned a page, and nodded in approval at the precise entries. Excellent. This is exactly the kind of evidence we need. It demonstrates forethought, memory, organizational skill. He set it down. Leave this with me. Go home. Act normally. Do not, under any circumstances, alert them to what we are doing. Let them have their illusion a little while longer. I stood. Thank you, Arthur. He stood as well, coming around the desk again. This time, he placed a hand on my shoulder. No thanks needed. Martin was my friend. You are my client. And this, he said, his voice hard, is an abomination. We will stop it. I drove home with the same steady calm. The armor of the dress felt appropriate now. I had entered the lawyer's office as a wounded mother. I was leaving as a client, a principal in my own defense. The battle lines were drawn, not in my kitchen with whispers, but in a court of law with documents and facts. The quiet fury had found its channel. It was time to let it flow. The normalcy of the next few days was a performance I conducted with precision. I watered my garden. I baked a pound cake, leaving it on the counter when Marcus and Chloe visited. I let my gaze wander occasionally during conversation, as if tracking a distant memory. I accepted their suggestions about easy-to-use pill organizers and nodded absently at brochures for full-service senior living communities they left on my coffee table. Each act of pretended confusion was a deliberate stitch in the tapestry of their misconception. I watched them become more comfortable, more solicitous in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. Their confidence was my camouflage. Arthur called on the third day. His voice was brisk. Doctor, Evans can see you tomorrow at 2. His office is in the Medical Plaza on Grand. I've already sent over a general background. He knows the context. Will he tell me what to expect? No, that's part of the evaluation. But he's fair. Answer his questions directly. Don't perform. Just be yourself, your competent, sharp-witted self. That is the plan, I said. The following afternoon, I dressed in another of my armor outfits, a gray wool skirt and a crisp white blouse. I drove myself to the appointment. Dr. Evans's office was quiet, professional. He was a man in his 60s with a calm demeanor and observant eyes. He did not patronize me. The evaluation lasted 2 hours. It was thorough. He asked me the date, the current president, the mayor of our city. He had me count backward from 100 by sevens. I did so without error. He gave me a list of 3 words to remember: apple, penny, carpet, and asked me to recall them 20 minutes later after engaging in other tasks. I did. He presented hypothetical scenarios involving financial decisions. He showed me a complex medication schedule and asked how I would manage it. I explained the system I used, which involved a chart and a dedicated time each morning. He took notes. Then he moved to more personal matters. "Why do you believe your son is seeking guardianship?" I told him. I recounted the kitchen conversation verbatim, as I had for Arthur. I described the subsequent behavior, the brochures, the notes Marcus had taken at my last checkup. I spoke without embellishment, stating facts as I knew them. "Do you feel you are a danger to yourself or others?" he asked. "I do not." "Are you having difficulty paying bills, managing your home, feeding yourself?" "I am not. My accounts are balanced. My home is clean and maintained. I cook my own meals." He nodded, his pen moving across the paper. Finally, he set his clipboard down. "Mrs. Jefferson, this evaluation consists of a standard battery of cognitive tests and a clinical interview. Based on my observations today, you are well within the normal range for your age, with no indications of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. Your memory is intact, your judgment appears sound, and your understanding of your personal and financial situation is detailed and accurate." "Thank you, doctor. I will prepare a full report for Mr. Higgins. It will state my findings unequivocally." He paused, his professional demeanor softening a fraction. "These situations are difficult. I'm sorry you're facing this." "It is not difficult anymore," I said, gathering my purse. "It is simply a problem to be solved. Your report will be part of the solution." I returned to Arthur's office the next morning. He had the draft of the petition ready. Margaret ushered me in. Arthur's desk was clear except for a thick folder and a single sheet of paper. The report from Dr. Evans is already here, Arthur said, tapping the folder. "It's everything we could want, unequivocal. Meanwhile, my investigator has made some preliminary findings." He opened the folder and slid a document toward me. It was a bank statement, but not mine. "This is a summary of Marcus and Chloe's joint account activity from the last quarter. Notice the series of large credit card payments. The balances were significant. Also, a lien inquiry on a property, this one, from a luxury resort developer. They were exploring a vacation home investment that appears to have fallen through, leaving them with substantial debt." I looked at the numbers. They were staggering. The pressure they must have been under was financial, not concern for me. My house, my savings, were their exit strategy. "Have they filed anything?" I asked. "Not yet. They are likely still gathering their so-called evidence, which works in our favor." He handed me the single sheet. "This is the declaration you will sign. It states, under penalty of perjury, that you are of sound mind, that you have no need of a guardian, and that you are preemptively seeking a judicial declaration to that effect to forestall any malicious petitions. Read it." I read it. The language was legal, formal. It was a statement of pure fact. It felt powerful. "I'll sign it," I said. Arthur produced a pen. I signed my name, Eleanor R. Jefferson, with the same steady hand I had used for 40 years on report cards and official documents. The pen did not scratch or waver. "This will be filed with the court this afternoon," Arthur said, placing the document carefully into a larger envelope. "Once it is filed, Marcus and Chloe will be formally served with a copy. They will also receive notice of a hearing date, where a judge will review our petition and their inevitable response." He looked at me. "The shock will be considerable. They will contact you. They may be angry, or they may try to manipulate you into withdrawing the petition. You must not engage. You refer them to me. Do you understand?" "I understand." "Good. Go home. The next move is theirs, but they are now playing on our board by our rules." I drove home, but I did not go inside immediately. I went to my garden, I put on my gloves, and took my shears. I began to deadhead the roses, clipping off the spent blooms to make way for new growth. The action was methodical, productive. Each snip of the stem was a clean cut. My mind was quiet. The furious energy had been converted into motion, into procedure. The law was a machine, and Arthur had set it in motion on my behalf. I had provided the fuel, my testimony, my evidence, my clear mind. There was a deep, solid satisfaction in that. This was not the revenge of passion, it was the restitution of order. They had tried to create a false narrative about my mind. We were responding with documented truth about their actions. As I placed the withered rose heads in the compost bin, I thought of the petition traveling through the court system, a simple piece of paper carrying the weight of my defiance. It was a statement of fact, as Arthur said. And facts I had spent a lifetime teaching were stubborn things. They existed independent of desire. My son desired my wealth. I desired my autonomy. Only one of those desires was aligned with the facts. I would let the facts speak for me now. My part was to wait and to tend my garden. The machinery of justice was turning. I could almost hear it, a distant, steady hum. The summons was served on a Tuesday morning. Arthur had given me a general time frame. I knew it would happen during business hours at Marcus's office. The strategic choice was deliberate, maximizing professional humiliation, ensuring he was in a setting where he had to maintain control. I approved of the logic. I did not wait by the phone. I performed my Tuesday routine. I changed the bed sheets, the crisp cotton snapping in the laundry room. I vacuumed the living room, the methodical back and forth motion, a calming ritual. I prepared a simple lunch of soup and a sandwich, eating at the kitchen table while reading the newspaper. The world continued, its crises and triumphs printed in neat columns. My personal crisis was now a matter of court record, but the sun still shone through the window over my sink. Around 11:30, I imagined the scene. A process server, a neutral party in plain clothes, asking for Marcus Jefferson at the reception desk of his sleek financial consultancy. Marcus would be summoned from a meeting, or he would come out to the lobby expecting a delivery. He would be handed the envelope. He would see the official court heading. His face, I knew, would drain of color. The confident mask he wore in his professional life would crack. For a moment, he would be just a boy caught in a terrible lie. My phone remained silent. He would not call me first. He would call Chloe. Across town, Marcus stared at the document in his hands. The bright, sterile light of his office lobby reflected off the paper, making the black print seem harsh. The words, "in the matter of Eleanor R. Jefferson and petition for declaratory relief, re-testamentary capacity," swam before his eyes. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He managed a stiff nod to the server, turned on his heel, and walked back to his office, his gait too quick. He shut the door, leaning against it. His hands trembled as he fumbled for his phone. He dialed Chloe. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Hey, did you confirm the reservations for Saturday?" Chloe. His voice was a strained whisper. "She's filed something. With the court." "What? Who has?" "Mom." The word tasted like ash. "A petition. It's a preemptive thing. She's asking the court to declare her competent, to stop us from filing." Silence on the line. Then a sharp intake of breath. "That's impossible. How would she even—" Arthur. That old lawyer. She must have gone to him. "Of course she went to him," Marcus hissed, pressing his fingers to his temple. "He's filed a 30-page motion. There's a psychiatric evaluation attached. From a Dr. Evans, it says she's perfectly fine, no cognitive impairment." "We have our own doctor. We have notes." "Our notes are about her forgetting her glasses. This is a full report from a geriatric specialist. It dismantles everything before we even start." He scanned the document again, his eyes catching on a subsection. "Oh, God. What? There's a request for discovery. They're asking for our financial records." "Ours, Chloe. They're alleging undue influence and predatory intent." The color left Chloe's face 1,000 miles away. He could hear the panic in her voice now, the veneer of control shattering. They can't do that. That's private. That's our business. It's a court order if the judge grants it. And with this, he waved the document at the empty room. With her filing first, looking proactive and sane, and us looking like we're reacting, this is bad. This is very bad. What did the cover letter say? When is the hearing? 3 weeks. We have to respond. We have to get a lawyer, a real one, a fighter. We need to talk to her. We need to make her see this is a mistake, that she's confused, that Higgins is manipulating her. Chloe's voice was climbing, grasping for the narrative they had crafted, but it was slipping through her fingers like sand. She's not confused, Marcus snapped, then lowered his voice, glancing at his closed door. The report is clear. She played us. All that forgetting, the dithering. It was an act. She heard us. That night in the kitchen, she heard every word. The realization settled between them, a cold, heavy truth. Their plan, built on the assumption of her weakness, had collided with the reality of her strategic mind. The foundation was gone. "We're not giving up," Chloe said, her voice hardening into desperation. "We find a lawyer today, the best one we can afford. We fight this. She's an old woman. A judge will listen to us, her family." Marcus looked down at the petition, at the confident legal language that spoke of his mother's clear mind and his own alleged malfeasance. The words senile anyway echoed in his memory, a cruel joke that had just boomeranged back to strike him square in the chest. He felt a nausea that had nothing to do with physical illness. "Just find the lawyer," he said quietly, and ended the call. My phone rang at 12:45. I was outside repotting a fern that had outgrown its container. The soil was rich and dark under my fingernails. I let it ring 3 times, then wiped my hands on my apron and answered. "Mom." It was Marcus. His voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the strain beneath like a wire about to snap. "Marcus, how was your day? Did Arthur Higgins file something with the court today? On your behalf?" I placed the fern gently into its new pot, settling the roots. "Yes, he did. A standard procedural matter, to clarify things." "A procedural matter?" The control cracked. "It's a declaration of war. It accuses us of terrible things. Why would you do this without talking to me?" "I believe the time for talking passed recently," I said, my voice even. "The petition speaks for itself. Any questions you have should be directed to Mr. Higgins. He is handling all communications on this subject." "You're shutting me out? Your own son?" "For now, yes. On this specific topic. The legal process has begun, Marcus. It's best to let it follow its course." I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end. "Was there anything else? I'm in the middle of gardening." A long silence. Then the line went dead. I placed the phone on the garden bench and returned to the fern, pressing the soil firmly around its base. The plant needed a larger space to grow. It needed to be free of constricting roots. I understood the feeling perfectly. The first shockwave had hit its target. Now we would see what they built in the rubble. He arrived just after 6. I heard the car door slam with unnecessary force, the quick, heavy footsteps on my front walk. I was in the living room in my armchair with a book open on my lap. I had expected this. The phone call had been too brief, too unresolved for him. He needed to see my face, to try and regain control in person. I did not get up. I listened as his key turned in the lock. He still had one, a fact I made a mental note to rectify, and the door swung open. He stood in the doorway for a moment, his silhouette framed against the evening light. He was still in his work suit, but his tie was loose and his expression was shattered. He closed the door and walked into the living room, stopping a few feet from my chair. He was breathing as if he had run here. "Mom." The word was an accusation. "What did you do?" I closed my book, marking my place with a finger. I filed a petition with the court. I believe you are aware of that. Why? Why would you do this? To your own family. His voice rose, cracking with a blend of fury and desperation. Do you have any idea what this looks like? A court summons delivered to my office? My colleagues saw. They're asking questions. I imagine they are, I said, my voice level. Legal matters often generate questions. This isn't a joke. He took a step closer, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. You let that old lawyer fill your head with nonsense. We were trying to help you. We were concerned. This legal attack, it's paranoid. It's exactly the kind of thing that proves you're not thinking clearly. I looked up at him then, directly into his eyes. He faltered, seeing something in my gaze that was not confusion. What exactly was your plan to help me, Marcus? Describe it to me, step by step. He blinked, thrown by the question. We wanted to make things easier, to take some of the burden off you, maybe find a place where you'd have more social interaction, less upkeep. A facility. A nice community, with activities, people your age, medical staff on site. The rehearsed lines tumbled out, but they sounded hollow even to him now. And my house, he shifted his weight. The house is too much for you. The stairs, the yard. We'd sell it. The money would go into a trust, for your care. A trust you would control, for your benefit. I placed the book on the side table, and when I objected, if I said I didn't want to leave my home, that I felt perfectly capable, he waved a hand, a gesture of dismissal he immediately regretted. You might not understand what's best. That's why we'd have the doctors evaluate, for your own good. The doctors have evaluated me, Marcus. Dr. Evans. His report is filed with the court. It states I am of perfectly sound mind. It states I am fully capable of managing my person and my affairs. I paused, letting the words settle. So your plan, based on a false premise, would then have required you to override my clear wishes and my demonstrated competence. That is not help. That is a takeover. His face flushed. You're twisting it. You're listening to that lawyer instead of your son. I listened to my son very carefully, I said, my voice dropping, becoming quieter and colder. About 3 weeks ago, in my kitchen. You were by the island. Chloe was near the sink. You were drinking the Cabernet I had opened for dinner. He went very still. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. I was in the hallway, I continued, each word precise. I heard your entire strategy session, the equity in this house, my pension, restructuring your financial picture, the doctor's notes, the petition for guardianship. I leaned forward slightly, and I heard your concluding argument, the one you thought sealed it. His lips moved, but no sound came out. The color that had risen to his cheeks now fled, leaving him pale. You said, she's senile anyway. No one will believe her over us. I recited it without emotion, a simple statement of fact. Chloe laughed. The room was silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall was suddenly very loud. Marcus stared at me, his eyes wide, his breath shallow. He looked like a child who had been caught in a devastating lie, which, I supposed, he was. You, he whispered. I am not senile, Marcus. I never was. I pretended a little forgetfulness after that to see how far you would go. You and Chloe were eager to believe it. You saw a solution to your financial problems, not a person. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, as if his legs could no longer hold him. He put his head in his hands. For a long minute, he said nothing. I waited. When he looked up, his eyes were red. Mom, we were under pressure. The debts, the failed investment. We were scared. We thought it was a way out. We thought you wouldn't really know. You thought I wouldn't mind, I corrected him. You thought my mind was already gone, so it wouldn't matter. That is the profound cruelty of it. You weren't just stealing from me. You were erasing me." "I'm sorry," he said, the words soft and utterly inadequate. I felt no surge of victory at his apology. I felt a deep, weary sorrow. "I am not angry, Marcus." This was true. The ice-cold fury had been spent in action. What remained was a clear, empty space. "I am disappointed. That is a heavier feeling. I am disappointed that the boy I raised, the man I was proud of, could look at his mother and see only an obstacle, a resource to be liquidated." He flinched, as if I'd struck him. "The legal process will continue," I said, returning to a practical tone. "You and Chloe have retained a lawyer, I assume. You will need to file a response. All future communication should go through Arthur Higgins." "You're cutting me out." It was a statement now, not a question. "On matters pertaining to my autonomy and my estate, yes, you created this division, not me. You made it a legal battlefield. We are now opposing parties. It is a fact you must accept." He stood up slowly, his movements those of an old man. He looked around the living room, at the photographs of our family, at the home he had grown up in and had planned to sell. He looked broken. Can we ever come back from this?" he asked, his voice raw. "That is not a question I can answer today," I said. "It depends on what you do next. It depends on whether that shame I see in your eyes leads to genuine change or just to more strategic calculations. Now, you should go. I believe you have a lot to discuss with your wife." He nodded, a jerky motion. He walked to the door, hesitated, then left without another word. I listened as his car started and drove away. I sat in the quiet for a time. The confrontation was over. The truth was out in the open between us. The power had shifted irrevocably. He knew I was not a passive figure to be managed. He knew I had heard his contempt and had responded not with tears, but with the full force of the law. I stood, picked up my book, and went to the kitchen to start my dinner. The familiar actions, chopping an onion, heating a pan, were steadying. The confrontation had been necessary, but it was only a step. The real battle was still ahead, in the conference rooms and court documents. I had looked my son in the eye and shown him the woman he had underestimated. Now we would see what he and his lawyer would do next. My disappointment was a weight, but it was no longer a weakness. It was simply another fact, and I was learning to build with facts. The silence after Marcus left was a vacuum, but it did not last long. My phone buzzed with a text from Arthur an hour later. "They've retained counsel, a David Pierce from Hartwell and Pierce. Aggressive reputation. Will need to be thorough." I replied simply, "I am ready." The following days became a routine of a different sort. Mornings were for my own life, gardening, housekeeping, reading. Afternoons were for the case. I spent hours in Arthur's office, or he came to my dining room table, which we transformed into a war room. The warm, memory-filled space became a place of clinical strategy. Arthur's investigator, a quiet woman named Linda, was efficient. Her findings formed a growing stack of paper. She provided the full context of Marcus and Chloe's financial distress, the high-interest loans taken to cover the failed land investment, the maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage on their own home. The numbers told a story of pressure and desperation. They were not merely greedy, they were drowning, and they had seen my estate as a life raft. "This is motive," Arthur said, tapping a summary sheet. "Clear, quantifiable motive. A judge will see it." More damning was an email chain Linda had obtained through a subpoena to the resort developer. It was between Chloe and a sales agent dated 2 weeks before the kitchen conversation. In it, Chloe inquired about the financial qualifications for the property investment, stating, "We expect a significant liquidity event from a family estate resolution in the near future, which should cover the down payment." "They were planning this before they even tested the waters with you," Arthur said, his voice grim. "The concern was a pretense from the start." I read the email. The cold transactional language was more hurtful than the whispered words. It was a blueprint. I placed it on the table. So we have motive and we have premeditation. We do. Combined with Dr. Evans's report, it paints a very clear picture. They sought to exploit a perceived weakness. The weakness did not exist. Arthur allowed himself a small, tight smile. We will bury them in paperwork. Their lawyer will be demanding a mediation session to try and settle before the hearing. We will go, but we will not settle. We will show our strength. Across town, in their sleek, minimally decorated home, Chloe was the engine of panic. I could picture it, though I did not see it. Arthur's network provided glimpses. David Pierce is the best we could get on short notice, she said, pacing across their polished concrete floor. Marcus sat on a low sofa, staring at his hands. He costs a fortune, but he has to be worth it. He says we need to counter their narrative. We need to prove she's always been eccentric, suggestible. She's not suggestible, Marcus muttered. She outmaneuvered us. Don't you dare fall apart now. Chloe's voice was a whip crack. This is your fault. You couldn't keep your voice down. You had to say the quiet part out loud. You agreed. You laughed. I didn't know she was lurking in the hallway like a spy. She stopped pacing, gripping the back of a chair. We have to find something. Old friends who can say she was forgetful. Her doctor before Evans. Anything. We have the notes from Dr. Bryson, the ones about her asking him to repeat the medication name. It's not enough. Pierce says Higgins will have a field day with it. We need a pattern. We need witnesses. She grabbed her laptop, typing furiously. There has to be something, a former colleague, a neighbor, someone who thought she was losing her edge. Marcus watched her, a hollow look in his eyes. What if we just stopped? What if we told our lawyer to drop it? Apologize to her? Chloe spun to face him, her expression incredulous. Drop it? Are you insane? She's filed a petition accusing us of financial predation. That's a matter of public record now. If we drop it, she wins completely. Our reputations are already damaged. We have to see this through and try to salvage something. A settlement, at least. Maybe she agrees to give us some money to make this go away, and we agree not to pursue guardianship. She won't give us a dime. Not now. Then we make her look so unstable that a judge will at least order some oversight, something we can influence. Chloe's desperation was morphing into a frantic, ruthless energy. We are not walking away with nothing, Marcus. We can't afford to. In my dining room, Arthur and I were building a wall of competence. We compiled decades of my tax returns, all filed accurately and on time. We gathered statements from my investment accounts, showing consistent, prudent management. I provided the lesson plans and correspondence from my final years as principal, demonstrating complex organizational skill. We need a personal touch, Arthur said one afternoon. Character witnesses, people who can speak to your sharpness. I made a list. Sarah Jenkins, my former vice principal, now retired. Ben Carter, the treasurer of the Community Garden Board, with whom I had meticulously managed the annual budget. My neighbor, Mrs. Miller, who had watched me single-handedly organize a neighborhood watch program 6 months prior. Arthur's paralegal contacted them. Each agreed without hesitation to provide a written affidavit. Sarah's email reply, which Arthur read to me, said, Nora Jefferson has one of the finest minds I've ever worked with. The idea that she is incapable is ludicrous and offensive. This is good, Arthur said, sorting the draft affidavits. It shows a community of respect. It contrasts sharply with the two people closest to her, who appear to have a direct financial interest in her being declared incompetent. He then showed me our formal response to their lawyer's request for discovery. We were providing everything they asked for, my financials, my medical history, because it all showcased my capability. In return, our discovery requests for their financials and communications were digging the hole deeper for them. The paper trail was becoming a noose. The mediation is scheduled for next Thursday, Arthur informed me. Pierce will push hard. He'll try to intimidate you, to fluster you. He may imply you're causing a family rift, that you're being stubborn. You must not react. You answer only the questions I tell you to answer. You are calm. You are polite. You are immovable. I understand, I said. I felt a steady certainty. The chaos was on their side. The frantic searches, the escalating legal bills, the crumbling marriage. My side was orderly, documented, true. As I drove home that evening, I considered the gathering storm. Chloe was scrambling in the dark, looking for ghosts of my decline that did not exist. Marcus was paralyzed by shame and consequence. They were reactive. Arthur and I were architects. We had drawn the plans, gathered the materials, and now we were building a structure so solid that their coming storm would break against it without leaving a mark. The confrontation in my living room had been emotional. The mediation would be intellectual, and I was ready. The conference room at the mediator's office was aggressively neutral. Beige walls, a long walnut table, chairs with gray upholstery. The air smelled of stale coffee and lemon-scented cleaner. Arthur and I arrived first. He placed his leather briefcase on the table with a soft thud, selecting the seat at the head for himself, positioning me to his right. It was a subtle claim of territory. Marcus and Chloe arrived with their lawyer, David Pierce. Pierce was a man in his 50s with a sharply tailored suit and a manner that attempted to project relaxed authority. He shook Arthur's hand with a firm grip and a thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Marcus would not look at me. His gaze was fixed on the blank notepad in front of him. Chloe's eyes, however, locked onto mine for a brief, challenging moment before she sat, her posture rigid. A retired judge named Wilkins served as the mediator. He was a grandfatherly man with a calm voice, but his eyes were watchful. He explained the process. This was a non-binding discussion to see if we could resolve the matter before the court hearing. The goal was mutual agreement. Pierce began. "Thank you, Judge Wilkins. My clients, Marcus and Chloe Jefferson, are here out of profound concern for Mrs. Eleanor Jefferson. This entire legal action has been a terrible shock to them. They are her family. Their only desire has been to ensure her safety and well-being as she navigates the natural challenges of aging." He spoke smoothly, painting a picture of misguided love. "We believe this petition is a reaction based on fear and perhaps some confusion. We're hopeful today we can move past the legal confrontations and back to a family discussion about compassionate care options." Arthur listened, his expression impassive. When Pierce finished, Arthur nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Pierce. My client, Mrs. Jefferson, is indeed concerned. Her concern, however, is not about her health. It is about a concerted effort to strip her of her legal rights based on a false premise of incapacity, motivated by financial gain." Chloe drew in a sharp breath, and a sharp. Marcus's head jerked up. Arthur continued, unperturbed. "To that end, we have submitted to you and to the mediator the independent psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Jonathan Evans." He slid a copy across the table to Judge Wilkins. Dr. Evans is a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist with an impeccable reputation. His evaluation, which included a full battery of cognitive tests and a clinical interview, concludes unequivocally that Mrs. Jefferson exhibits no signs of dementia or significant cognitive impairment. He finds her fully capable of managing her person and her substantial estate. Pierce held up a hand. "With respect, one evaluation, one definitive evaluation," Arthur corrected gently. "Contrasted with your client's evidence, which appears to consist of a note from a general practitioner about a momentary word-finding lapse during a routine visit. We have also submitted affidavits from 3 independent parties, a former professional colleague, a community board treasurer, and a neighbor, all attesting to Mrs. Jefferson's acute mental acuity and organizational capabilities as recently as the last few months." He let that sit in the silence. Pierce's smile had vanished. "Furthermore," Arthur said, opening his briefcase again, We have begun to examine the context for this sudden concern. He did not remove the documents, merely rested a hand on the folder. Discovery has revealed that Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson are experiencing significant financial distress, high-interest debt, a failed speculative investment, a second mortgage. The timing of their newfound urgency regarding Mrs. Jefferson's competence coincides precisely with the collapse of their financial strategy. We have an email indicating they were counting on funds from a family estate resolution to cover a new investment before any discussions about care had ever taken place with Mrs. Jefferson. Marcus had gone pale. Chloe's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. Judge Wilkins looked at Pierce, his eyebrows raised. "Mr. Pierce." Pierce recovered quickly. "My client's financial situation is irrelevant and a private matter. This is a crude attempt to smear them. Their mother has exhibited signs of confusion. She has resisted reasonable suggestions for her safety. The petition they were considering was one of last resort to protect her." "From what?" I asked. My voice was quiet but clear in the room. It was the first time I had spoken. Everyone turned to look at me. Marcus finally met my eyes, his filled with a kind of panic. I asked, "From what?" I repeated. "From living in my own home, which is paid for, from managing my own finances, which are in order, from making my own medical decisions with a clean bill of health. What precisely was I to be protected from?" "From isolation, Mom," Marcus said, his voice strained. "From a fall, from forgetting to turn off the stove. I have a medical alert system. I have a housekeeper twice a month for heavy cleaning. I have never left the stove on." I stated each fact plainly. Your solution was not to hire more help if you were worried. It was to sell everything and place me in an institution. That is not protection. That is liquidation. Chloe leaned forward. "Nora, no one is talking about an institution. We found beautiful communities." "Which I did not ask for and do not want," I interrupted, my tone still even. "My wants are clear. They have been documented. They are supported by medical evidence. The only conflict here is between my want to retain my autonomy and your want to control my resources." Judge Wilkins steepled his fingers. "The court," he said slowly, "tends to look very favorably on an individual's demonstrated capacity and clearly expressed wishes, especially when those wishes are rational and supported by objective evidence. Mr. Pierce, your client's financial motivations, as alleged, are troubling. Even if not proven, they cast a long shadow over their claims of pure altruism." He turned to Arthur. "Mr. Higgins, what is your client seeking from this mediation?" Arthur looked at me. I gave a slight nod. "A withdrawal of any intent to petition for guardianship or conservatorship," Arthur said. "A public court-affirmed declaration of Mrs. Jefferson's capacity, and a formal, legally binding agreement that Mr. and Mrs. Jefferson will not initiate any such proceedings in the future without first presenting new, compelling, and objective medical evidence of a substantial decline to be evaluated by an independent expert of Mrs. Jefferson's choosing." "That's unreasonable," Pierce blurted out. "It is the minimum required to protect my client from further predatory actions," Arthur replied. "We came here to find a middle ground," Pierce said, attempting to regain control. "Perhaps a trust with shared oversight, a compromise that addresses everyone's concerns." "There is no middle ground on my client's fundamental legal rights," Arthur said. "They are not a bargaining chip. The evidence is overwhelmingly in her favor. We are prepared to present all of this to a judge who will see the same picture we see. The purpose of this mediation is to give your clients a chance to concede gracefully before a public ruling makes their position and their motives unavoidably clear." The room was silent again. Judge Wilkins looked at Marcus and Chloe. "You have heard the position. I must advise you that, based on what has been presented today, Mr. Higgins has a very strong case. Proceeding to a hearing carries significant risk for you, both in terms of the outcome and in terms of further public exposure of your financial dealings. You may wish to take a recess to discuss this with your counsel. Pierce stood, his chair scraping loudly. "We'll take a recess." He gestured sharply to Marcus and Chloe. They stood and followed him out of the room, a tense, silent procession. The door closed behind them. Arthur let out a slow breath and turned to me. "You did perfectly," he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. I looked at the empty chairs where my son and his wife had been sitting. The confrontation was not dramatic. It was procedural, factual, and in that arena, armed with the truth, we had just won. The rest was just negotiation over the terms of their surrender. We waited in the conference room. Judge Wilkins had stepped out to take a phone call. The silence was not uncomfortable for me. Arthur reviewed his notes, making small marks in the margin with a precise silver pen. I watched the second hand sweep around the clock on the wall. Each tick was a measure of their unraveling, happening just out of sight. In a small, windowless breakout room down the hall, the facade crumbled. David Pierce closed the door with a soft click that sounded like a verdict. He placed his tablet on the table and turned to face his clients. His relaxed authority was gone, replaced by a blunt professional assessment. "We have a serious problem," he began, his voice low. "Higgins is not bluffing. He has a psychiatric report that is bulletproof. He has character witnesses. He has your financials, and he will use them to paint a picture of motive that any judge will find compelling. The email about the estate resolution is a direct hit." Chloe was shaking her head, a frantic denial. "There has to be something we can use. What about the earlier doctor? What about her resistance? That proves she's irrational." "It proves she doesn't want to go to a retirement home," Pierce said flatly. "A judge will not force a competent adult into one because her family thinks it's a good idea. That's not how it works." He looked at Marcus, who was leaning against the wall, staring at the floor. "Marcus, you need to engage. What is your response to the allegation that you called her senile?" Marcus's head lifted slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. "It's true. I said it. She heard it." Chloe whirled on him. "You don't just admit it. We say it was taken out of context. We say you were frustrated, worried." "What's the context, Chloe?" Marcus's voice was hollow. "The context was us planning to take everything from her. The context was us deciding her mind was already gone, so we could take her house and her money. There is no good context. We were trying to secure our future, her future too." Chloe's voice rose, shrill in the small room. "By lying? By pretending she was losing her mind? She's not. Look at what she just did in there. She sat completely calm and dismantled us with facts. That's the woman we called senile." He pushed off from the wall, a sudden energy of despair animating him. "We were wrong. We were cruel. And we got caught," Pierce interjected, trying to regain control of the sinking ship. "Whether you were wrong morally is not my concern. My concern is the legal outcome. And legally, you are in a weak position. My strong recommendation is to negotiate the best terms of surrender you can. Withdraw any intent to file for guardianship. Agree to her terms. Try to salvage some semblance of a relationship because you are not going to win this in court." "Surrender?" Chloe spat the word. "After all this, after the legal fees, the humiliation, we walk away with nothing? We're supposed to just let her win?" "She has already won," Pierce stated. "The mediation made that clear. The question now is whether you leave with a binding agreement that prevents future conflict, or whether you force a public hearing that will detail your financial troubles and your private conversation in a public courtroom. Which do you think is better for your reputations? For your careers?" Marcus let out a choked sound that was almost a laugh. "Our reputations, right. The reputations of the people who tried to put their mother in a home to pay off their debts." "Stop it," Chloe snapped, her face flushed with fury. "This is your fault, your weakness. If you had just handled it better, if you hadn't been so obvious—" "My fault?" Marcus's hollow despair ignited into anger. "Your idea. The spreadsheets, the research on facilities, the constant pushing. You saw a balance sheet, not a person. You never even liked her. And you loved her so much you were ready to sign the papers," Chloe fired back. "Don't you dare pin your guilt on me. You wanted the money just as badly. You just lack the stomach to do what needs to be done." They stood glaring at each other, the unified front they had presented to the world now a pile of wreckage on the gray carpet. Pierce watched them, his expression one of professional disappointment. This was why cases like these often fell apart. The conspirators turned on each other when pressure was applied. "Enough!" Pierce said, his voice cutting through the hostility. "You can assign blame later. We have about 5 minutes before we need to go back in. You need to decide. Do I go in and try to negotiate a settlement based on Higgins's terms, or do I tell the mediator we are proceeding to a hearing, where you will almost certainly lose and likely face a judgment that includes being ordered to pay a portion of your mother's legal fees for bringing a frivolous challenge?" The financial blow was the final weight. Marcus slumped back against the wall. Chloe's furious defiance flickered, replaced by the cold calculation of impending loss. She looked from Pierce to Marcus, searching for a way out and finding none. "Negotiate," Marcus said, the word a sigh of defeat. Chloe closed her eyes for a long second, then gave a sharp, single nod. Back in the main conference room, Judge Wilkins resumed his seat. Arthur and I watched as they filed back in. The change was visible. Marcus looked drained, older. Chloe's earlier rigidity was gone, replaced by a stiff, resentful tension. Pierce's smile was entirely absent. "Judge Wilkins," Pierce began, his tone all business now, "after discussion, my clients have instructed me to withdraw any present intention to petition for guardianship or conservatorship. They are willing to enter into a binding agreement based on the framework Mr. Higgins outlined." Arthur gave a small, courteous nod. "We appreciate that. We will draft the stipulation and order for your review. It will include the declaratory relief and the injunction against future filings without meeting the specified threshold." Judge Wilkins looked pleased. "I'm glad to hear it. This is a far better outcome for everyone than a protracted court battle. I will approve the order once it's presented." The rest of the meeting was a blur of logistical details, dates for submitting the draft, procedural formalities. I spoke only to confirm my understanding and agreement. My eyes met Marcus's once. He looked away quickly, but not before I saw the profound shame that had settled there. It was not the reaction I had wanted from my son, but it was the honest one. Chloe's gaze was fixed on a point on the wall behind me, her jaw clenched. As we gathered our things to leave, Arthur leaned close. "It's over. They've capitulated. The order will be ironclad." I nodded. The legal battle was won. But as I watched my son and his wife walk out of the room ahead of us, not touching, not speaking, moving in separate spheres of misery, I knew the personal aftermath was just beginning. The crack in their facade had become a chasm, and I was on the other side of it. The signed stipulation from the mediation arrived by courier 2 days later. I read it carefully at my kitchen table. The language was dense, but the meaning was clear. Marcus and Chloe Jefferson agreed that I, Eleanor R. Jefferson, was of sound mind. They withdrew any present intention to seek guardianship. They were permanently enjoined from filing such a petition without meeting a nearly impossible burden of proof. The court would enter it as an order. It was a legal shield forged in fact and delivered by their own concession. I placed the document in a file folder. The defensive battle was over. Now it was time for offense. Not an attack on them, but an affirmative act to secure what was mine. On my terms, forever. I called Arthur. "The order is perfect," I said when he answered. Now we need to talk about my will." "I was hoping you'd say that," Arthur replied. "My thoughts exactly. When can you come in?" We met in his office the next morning. The atmosphere was different now. The tension of impending conflict was gone, replaced by a focused, constructive energy. Arthur had already pulled the old will, the one drafted after Martin's death, which left the bulk of the estate to Marcus, with me as the primary beneficiary, of course. "The old will is sound," Arthur said, "but it no longer reflects reality, or your wishes, I suspect." "It does not," I agreed. "Leaving everything to Marcus outright is no longer tenable. It would reward the behavior we just spent weeks fighting. More importantly, it would leave my legacy vulnerable to his poor judgment and Chloe's influence. The money would simply plug the holes in their leaking boat, and then it would be gone. My life's work, Martin's life's work, vanished." Arthur nodded. "We have several tools. A trust is the most flexible. We can set conditions, appoint an independent trustee, dictate distributions." I had been thinking about this. The cold clarity that had guided me since the kitchen extended to this planning. I do not wish to disinherit Marcus completely. That feels punitive in a way that is beneath me, but I cannot give him direct control, nor can I involve Chloe in any way. "What is your goal for the assets?" Arthur asked, pen poised. "To do some good, to reflect the values Martin and I shared, to create something that lasts and that honors our story." I looked out his window at the city below. Education. That was our lives. I want to establish a scholarship fund in our names for Black students pursuing degrees in education. At my alma mater, that is where the majority of the estate should go. Arthur wrote this down. A charitable remainder trust could be structured very favorably. It would provide you with income during your lifetime. Then the principal flows to the scholarship fund upon your passing. It's tax efficient and ensures the capital is preserved for its ultimate purpose. "And for Marcus?" I asked. "We can create a separate, smaller trust, a discretionary trust. We appoint an independent trustee, a bank's trust department, for instance. The trustee would have sole discretion to make distributions for the benefit of Marcus and potentially for any future grandchildren for specific purposes: education, health care, a first home down payment. The principal would be protected from creditors and from poor decisions. He would never receive a lump sum. Chloe would have no access or standing." The structure appealed to me. It was not an emotional cutoff. It was a rational, protective framework. It acknowledged he was my son without empowering his worst instincts. The focus on potential grandchildren was intentional, a thread of legacy that bypassed the corrupted generation. "And the house?" I asked. "You can leave the house to the charitable trust as well. It can be sold and the proceeds added to the scholarship fund. Or you could leave a life estate to Marcus, the right to live there for his lifetime. But given the circumstances, I would not recommend it. It would create entanglement and conflict." "Sell it," I said decisively. "The house is full of memories, but it is also a physical and financial burden for an heir. Let it help a future teacher instead." I paused. I want a specific symbolic amount left to Marcus directly. A small sum. Enough to show he was not forgotten, but not enough to change his life. $1 would be cruel. $10,000 is a statement. Arthur made another note. "Understood. We will also include a no contest clause. If he challenges the will, he forfeits even the $10,000 and the benefits of the discretionary trust. It's a standard deterrent." Good. I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was not about revenge, it was about stewardship. I was stewarding my legacy away from predatory hands and toward a purpose that would outlive me. The scholarship would bear our names, Martin and Eleanor Jefferson. It would help shape futures. That was a victory no one could ever take from me. The following week, the documents were ready. I returned to Arthur's office to sign. Margaret had witnessed 1,000 signings, but she treated this one with a particular solemnity. The stack of paper was impressive. The pour-over will, the charitable remainder trust agreement, the discretionary trust for Marcus. Arthur guided me through each signature line, explaining each one. This establishes the trust. This funds it. This appoints the trustee. This is the will that directs everything into the trust upon your passing. I signed my name, Eleanor R. Jefferson, on each line indicated. My hand was steady. There was no drama, no weighty pause. It was a series of administrative acts, but together they formed the architecture of my final wishes. They were the ultimate correction to the narrative my son had tried to create. He had seen me as a weak ending. I was defining my own legacy. When the last signature was done, Arthur gathered the documents. I'll have these executed copies back to you by the end of the week. They are effective immediately. You have done a very wise thing, Nora. You have taken control. I had excellent counsel, I said. You provided the resolve. I merely provided the tools. He smiled, a genuine warm expression that reached his eyes. Martin would be proud, and so am I. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in months. The furious energy was gone, fully transformed now into something settled and permanent. The law had been my sword and my shield. Now it was the blueprint for my enduring peace. The battle was truly over. All that remained was to live out my life, in my home, on my terms, with the quiet certainty that my final word on my own worth was now bound in leather and filed with the court. It was the most satisfying conclusion I could have devised. The final court order arrived, a single page that made official everything we had negotiated. It was a quiet end to the legal drama. There was no fanfare, no dramatic courtroom scene, just a stamp, a signature, and the matter was closed. My competency was a matter of law. Their petition was forever barred. I placed the order in the same file folder with the stipulation and a copy of my new will. The file was not thick, but its contents were immovable. A week after the order was entered, Marcus came to the house alone. I saw his car through the front window. He sat in the driveway for several minutes before getting out. I was in the garden, tying up the climbing roses that had grown wild during the weeks of my preoccupation. I did not stop when I heard the gate open. He stood at the edge of the patio watching me work. I finished securing a stem to the trellis before I turned, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "Mom," he said. His voice was tentative. "Marcus." I waited. "I got a copy of the order." "I assumed you would." He shifted his weight, looking older and wearier than I had ever seen him. I wanted to apologize properly for everything. The things I said, what we planned, it was wrong. It was cruel. I see that now. I listened. The apology was there. The words were correct. But I listened for what lay beneath them. There was shame. Yes, there was regret for being caught. But I also heard the faint, persistent hum of self-pity. The apology was as much for his own discomfort as for my pain. "Thank you for saying that," I replied. My tone was neutral, acknowledging the statement without absolving the action. I hope maybe in time we can find a way to move past this, to be a family again." I looked at him, at my son, and felt a final, quiet severance. "We are still family, Marcus. That is a biological and legal fact. But the trust that defined our relationship is broken. You broke it. Moving past it implies returning to a state before the break. That is not possible. The crack will always be there." His shoulders slumped. "So that's it? You're just going to shut me out forever?" "I am not shutting you out. You are facing the consequences of your actions. Those consequences include my necessary distance. You may call me. I will answer. We may speak of neutral things, but you will not be involved in my financial or legal life. You will not have a key to this house. You will not be the executor of my estate or the inheritor of my legacy. Those privileges were forfeited. That is the consequence." He swallowed hard. "I've lost my job, the firm, the legal issues, the gossip. They let me go. Chloe and we're separating. The debts." He trailed off, perhaps hoping for a lifeline, a softening. I felt a pang, but it was distant, like hearing about the troubles of an acquaintance. "I am sorry for your professional and personal difficulties, truly. But they are the results of choices you and Chloe made together, long before you targeted me. I cannot fix them. My resources are no longer available to bail you out. They have a different purpose now." He stared at me, and I saw the last flicker of hope die in his eyes. He had come with an apology that was also a probe, testing for weakness, for a maternal reflex that would override logic. He found none. "I understand," he said, the words flat and final. "I think you should go now," I said gently. "We have said what needs to be said." He nodded, turned, and walked back through the gate. I did not watch him drive away. I turned back to my roses. That evening, as the sun began its descent, I sat on the stone bench in the garden. The air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I felt no triumph. I felt no lingering anger. What I felt was a profound and solid peace. The revenge was complete, but it had never been about harming them. It had been about removing their ability to harm me. It had been about reclaiming my narrative from their cruel whisper. I had done that. I had used the tools of the system they sought to exploit, and I had won. My mind, my home, my legacy were secure. I looked at my hands, resting in my lap. There was soil under my nails. They were the hands of a woman who had tended things: children, a school, a marriage, a garden. They were capable hands. They had signed the documents that secured my future. They had planted the flowers that bloomed around me now. I would live out my days here, in this house filled with the memory of love and the quiet evidence of my own resilience. The scholarship in mine and Martin's name would be created. Maybe someday a young teacher would stand in a classroom because of it. That was a good thought. The sun dipped below the fence, casting long shadows. A bird sang its evening song from the oak tree. I breathed in the peace. It was not a peace that required anyone's permission or company. It was mine, earned and built, stone by legal stone, until it was a wall around my soul that no one could breach. I had not just survived their plot. I had rearranged the landscape of my life so that their betrayal was now only a small, receding feature in the distance. I was here. The garden was here. The quiet was here. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.